Today's Dirt Road Divinity guest is Jamie Portwood. As a writer, Jamie weaves healing magic with words. As the programming director for Right Space Houston, she feels that this passion work is a way of engaging concretely in the repair of the world. She believes that being able to write about things, especially her feelings, saved her life when dealing with abuse and being shunned by the church when she most needed support. As a line in her poetry shares, Jamie has forgotten more about the Bible than most of us will ever learn. And this is something that you can definitely see in our following conversation. She has deep insights and a great deal of wisdom. Now, after breaking ranks with the fundamentalist approach of her upbringing, Jamie now refers to herself as both a, quote, disciple of the rabbi from Galilee and also a practicing witch. When it comes to spirituality, her approach is, if it works for you and you are thriving, then that's amazing. And to that, I simply say, amen. You can find Jamie in the incredible offerings of Right Space Houston online at rightspacehouston.org. And you can connect with me and the Dirt Road Divinity podcast at a number of links offered in the show notes. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jamie Portwood. Hello and welcome back for another episode of Dirt Road Divinity. I'm your host, Lisa Wade, and today I am ecstatic to be talking with Jamie Portwood. Jamie, hello and welcome.
Hi. I'm so honored to be here, actually. Just thank you for inviting me. It's the highlight of my week, I think.
Well, excellent. I'm so grateful that you had time and the opportunity to chat. You know, we met, actually we haven't met in person yet, but yeah, when I moved to the Houston area, one of the very first things I did was thought, okay, what kind of communities would I want to join here? Would I want to get involved in somehow? And found out about Right Space of Houston, which you happen to be the programming director there, and reached out. And then we were in a spiritual memoir class together. And I just remember through that class thinking, A, she's fascinating, and B, I'd like to be her friend, much less let's have a podcast conversation. But I just thought you were cool. And
thank you.
Well, yeah.
I'm always like me. I'm such a nerd. Like I'm the little geek in school that was like, hey, I have like one friend.
I think just like souls recognize each other.
This is true. This is very true.
And when we can nerd on words, that thrills me. And so before we got started, before I pressed record, on this conversation, you had talked about how your work at Right Space is really kind of your passion work. Yes. And used phrases like that through words, it's concretely making an effect in the repair of the world. And that hit me. That hit me. Tell me a little bit about how you came to recognize the power of words and about your writing also.
Oh, man. So I think the love of words started really early with my grandpa, who would teach me, like, I don't even think it's a word. Never been able to find it, but he would teach me these huge, long words when I was this tiny little toddler, because he thought it was hilarious that I could pronounce them perfectly. So at like 2 years old, I'm telling everybody, no, thank you, I'm sufficiently serencified, like after a meal. So, and then I guess because my grandfather was a Lutheran minister, so he had higher education. My grandmother was a reader, so she had a big vocabulary. My mom is educated. My dad, was in school and loved to read. And so words have always been I don't know, even my nieces when they were little, my 2-year-old niece was like, I've already watered this sector of the garden. So we love words and we're very specific about words, and naming things is such a powerful, powerful magic, right? Mm. And when you are able to tell your story and actually claim your story, it just I don't even know how to describe that. That's a magic that is beyond words, and the fact that like the divine inspires us to write, inspires us to art, we have these sacred texts that are preserved, and like I was raised that the Bible was the only sacred text, and I'm like, man, if it's still here on earth through the cataclysmic like historical events, we've still got it. God had a hand in that.
There
And
can
it's
be some
important.
sacredness there too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I've always just loved the power of words to help name what was going on inside of me. I've always been like the big feeler.
Yeah.
And so I turned to poetry as the angsty like teenager, who was just really struggling. And I would write these poems that I look back on now and I'm like, oof, like I'm glad they're in a cedar chest and not in the world, but
But for a lot of people, putting pen to paper is therapy. That is how we process. And it's so important to have that tool. Even if you don't feel like you've got the skill, just to have the tool.
yeah, well, I mean, like, who is it? Was it Joan Didion who said, I write to know what I think?
Mm,
And I'm like, I write to figure out what I'm feeling,
mm,
and then for my healing journey, I'm usually writing toward how I want to feel,
yeah.
because I may not feel forgiveness for a lot of the, traumatic events, but that's what I want to feel. So I'm working toward that, and writing toward that.
Mm.
It helps to write toward it.
Almost as if calling it in by putting the words out there. The idea that words are like magic wands in a way, and the chance to call it in, or at least clarify what is the thing that I'd like to
Yeah.
feel, or the way in which I'd like to feel.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, language is what we have to communicate, And I think being chronically misunderstood, both like from a neurodivergent standpoint and also from the misunderstanding that like being called crazy when like I was like, no, actually abused is the term you are looking for.
Mm, yeah.
Abuse victim looks like it looks like crazy
Mm,
because it is crazy. And so being able to write about things like honestly, I think saved my life. And then being able to look back since I'm now in a place of safety, and I'm in a place like a good place, I can look back on it and go, oh, I see what was going on there. And even though like I don't think so that everything happens for a meaning or for a reason,
mhm.
I don't particularly like that saying or that the meaning of that, because there are terrible things that are completely and totally random, that happen all the time. But we can give reason to all of those things that happen simply by going, okay, well, what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
What am I trying to like? What am I trying to, I don't know, use it as a lesson for, or however we look at it, however we grow from it, then we're giving it meaning and we're giving it a reason, for happening. Like I can look back on my whole life and go, wouldn't trade it for worlds. I mean, any of the experiences, because I really like me now and I really like the place I'm at and I really like what I know, you
Mhm.
know. Um, but oof, I don't think I would ever go through it again for worlds.
Yeah. Might not wish it on another.
No,
Yeah.
no. And in fact, if I can save anybody, 20 years between like, me at 46 and me at 26, Like, I would like to be able to do that for somebody. Like, if I could shortcut you 20 years of my experience so that you can learn something along the way instead of, experiencing it. Like, yeah, that would be good.
Way to benefit the world for sure. And that's such a powerful choice point that you just pointed out, that when shit happens, and sometimes
It is
we just
shit.
look at it and it's just shit, but when shit happens, can we choose and for it to become the manure, that helps us grow instead of just the shit that buries us? And
I like that analogy because I have had horses and it does make your garden grow.
but sometimes being in a place where that choice even seems possible,
Yeah.
can be tough. And so hearing you talk about it, it sounds like you found a lot of that power and choice potential through words and through using language and naming things as a way to help you see it, to
Yeah.
recognize the insights or the growth or the learning rather than just the burying. Yeah.
I look at it as, I really do like the metaphor of the soul as a house,
Mm.
because I have lots and lots of like levels,
Mhm.
and there's lots and lots of rooms, and there's so many rooms that I like, it was just like, oh, well, shutting that door. And I'm very good at that. Like, that's what trauma and moving around a lot,
Mm.
like, really helps you go, well, I'm just going to shut that door and never look there again.
Mm.
And then like the pandemic happened, and I read that it was happening. It wasn't just me, that it felt like all of these things just kept coming up. Like, I was like, okay, no, I can't stop. This is too, I don't want to deal with that. Okay, not ready. Wait, hold on. Wait, but I read that basically because of the pandemic, the additional stress
Mm.
and like, tension and like the news just being like, well, what more, that our bodies,
Ah.
our very kind bodies that keep so much of our stuff for us, so that
Mhm.
we don't have to deal with it, or don't have to deal with it. The body's like, I'll take it. And the body was like, I can't.
I'm
Nothing.
done. Tapped out.
So if you want the new stress, the old stuff's gonna have to come out. So here you go, trade. And I was like, wow, like, I feel like I pandemic so hard.
Uh, well, it seems like you came out of pandemic and recently had kind of an epic journey
Yes,
overseas. And
I did.
if you don't mind, I would love to hear a bit about that. And especially from the little bit we've talked, it sounds like the things that were particularly meaningful in the journey um, might have been a little bit, in some ways, were kind of rooted in ancestry, and in a
Mhm.
lot of ways might have been a little at odds with um, family upbringing or cultural upbringing, if that's
Yes.
fair
Yeah.
or an
Yeah.
understatement.
Yeah. So, um, I knew that I grew up evangelical. And it wasn't until the pandemic and I really started unpacking a whole lot of boxes that I realized, oh no, I grew up fundamentalist. Like, we grew up on the right side of the evangelical church.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's a whole lot of things that are absolutely like, that is of the dark period. Like, if you want to be possessed by demons, that's a good way to go about doing it. Like, like, there are no such things as past lives, there are no such things as ghosts, there are angels and demons at war in the space between your soul and your spirit. But like, so it's this very interesting, like, ancestors or something that like are, an evil practice, that kind of thing. I have thrown all of that out of the door during the pandemic,
Mhm.
those kinds of beliefs, and really tapped into my ancestors. And on my mom's side, I am 100% Norse.
Mhm.
So like, there is a strong call to the Norse side of that. But I've always had this like strong kind of like interest in the pre-Roman Britain, with the druidic practices that are very much very much nature oriented, and I'm one of those, like, I pick up sticks on my walks.
With you. Yep.
So right before I went to the UK, and it was my first time crossing the Atlantic, I found out that my dad's side of the family is actually like 100% British Isles.
Oh, wow.
There's Scottish, there's Welsh, which I'm really happy about. And then there's, the United Kingdom, specifically in that central region, like below Scotland, but north of, so yeah, we flew into Manchester, and it was a driving tour. So we got to like actually drive through the countryside and everything. And we picked up the car in Manchester, and like my first view of the Yorkshire moors and that sky, and just how open it just overwhelmed me, and I started like weeping. Like, I still want to cry thinking about it. Like, I'm still processing the deeply emotional response I had to that land, and how grounded I felt there, and how just, I don't even know, like, I'm still, like I said, I'm still processing it. And I think part of it is that the north side of my family is so well established, right? Like, my mom is kind of the sun that we all orbited, and my dad was very much scapegoated. And his side of the family, which, I mean, granted, they are from North Florida, and like, they are deep South. My grandmother was as racist as they come. I'm pretty sure my grandfather was, but he died when I was too little to actually know. And yet, like, that's still one side of my family, and it's kind of always felt lopsided. And it's weird because I'm actually, like, my right leg is a half inch short. So I'm like literally lopsided.
Yep.
And so all of the Norse stuff I'm very familiar with. And like, I've got my troll cross, and, I'm familiar with runes and stuff like that, but I've not ever tapped into my dad's side of the family. I don't know that side of the family's history, and I believe that as I'm healing, there is, somehow psychically, it reverberates all the way back to the source of that trauma, which are human beings who died before I was ever born. Right. And so I feel like not knowing that side of the family nearly the way that I know my mom's side of the family, it felt like I was tapping into ancestry that was, helped me feel not so lopsided. But then like, I was in Edinburgh, like, we ended up in Edinburgh, and I had moments where I was like, oh, well, this is really familiar, but it's huge and really clean. And I missed all of the horses being there. Yes, and I this sounds so crazy, like saying these kinds of things, and like believing that actually there are past lives, and like whether it's an ancestor's past life, or my own past life, like that for me is just like, this is literally coming out of my mouth. Wow. Okay. But I had like this sensation that I had a peg leg, and that I fell a lot. Like, which, I mean, with the cobblestone streets and everything, it was just like, okay, well, that would make sense. And like, but apparently I was very, like, it felt like I had been a very cheerful soul, and like, who had the same kind of connection to horses that I get. That was weird. Like, that was just one of those, like, wow, okay, I guess this is who I am now.
Thanks for sharing that. That was one thing when we were in both Scotland and Ireland. The past life remembrances, for me at least, were vivid, and there would be streets that I would go down, and it'd be like, whoa, I remember that. Or like over near the Isle of Skye and the Isle of Mull in Scotland, and going, that's the place that I've seen in my, like, when I would do certain meditations or whatever, that's the place I've seen. And so it was just, so I hear you, in terms of how place, almost like the energy of place, can spark a remembrance, energetic or otherwise, that's just like, oh,
Whatever it was, like, what I mean, because yeah, I truly I'm tapping into all of the things I was told were bad,
Mm-hmm.
and were a bad way to approach God, or the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what I find is that, like, literally there is nothing at odds with taking a prayer and making it just into a talisman, or making it a physical object, and
Mm-hmm.
like making it be something that I put intention into or whatever, like that's a prayer. Why isn't that a prayer? So, and wanting to like tap into the fact that no matter what, I've always believed that there's ancestral wisdom, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we collectively know things. um and of course I've always believed in, spirit, the Holy Spirit. So like, yeah, I just like whatever it is. And I asked witch that I follow on TikTok. um and because she was like, if you want, she's like, this is a tower time, which is basically like everything's shaking, everything is like coming down, and she's like,
Yeah.
this is the time when you want to like tap into your ancestors, stay rooted and grounded. And I was like, I want to do that. How do I do the ancestors? And so she was like, light a candle
Mm-hmm.
and like ask. They are there to help you. They want to help you, and what was really interesting is like I did that and started, my grandmother is everywhere. I have her wedding pictures. I have essays or like compositions she wrote in high school. I have a drawing that she did. Like I have all of her sewing things,
Mm.
like things that she had her hands on. Like I have brooches that she wore and scarves. And I'm just like, huh, this is an interesting how I inherited and what I inherited. And
Mm-hmm.
that was, so yeah. Being able to tap into like the ancestry side on my dad's side of the family, because you can't do half and half, right? Like I can't tap into one side and then expect to be balanced,
Mm.
you know.
And I hadn't thought about it that way before. So thank you for bringing that awareness around. And even the idea that when we heal where we are now, especially if it's from a pain point or a scar that may be generations old, that
Mm-hmm.
because there really is no such thing as time and space or anything, that healing can go in all directions. And what a service to offer to ancestors, just like their wisdom and strength is a service to you now, your healing being a service to them. Whew.
Well, and it's a little bit like finding your voice too, like,
Mm-hmm.
because like, being able to really talk to my grandma and be like, Matt, what were you thinking? Or
Mm-hmm.
with my grandma on the other side, who actually has started to I've started to hear her voice, and it's just like, really, that's fun. But it's like being able to tell her, like, I will have none of your nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was mean. She was mean. She was mean. She was mean. you
Ooh.
know. And so it's like I kind of like kept her like at arm's length. Like, if you are going to be mean, you don't, like, if you want to participate in the healing, then please let's do this. But like if you're just here to be mean and snarky the way that you were when you were alive, like I don't really want to play that game with you.
Nope.
So it's kind of like finding your voice and standing up against, because I mean, like, the people who silence us the most are our families,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah.
So being able to like stand up to some of that energy, whichever, whatever it is like helpful.
Yeah, and the idea of how important it is to have boundaries, even when it's in the spirit world, or okay, well, grandma's been gone for a while, but yet I get to have a boundary now with her that I maybe even couldn't have or didn't have when I was a child or when she was still alive or whatever. And that's to me, one of the most freeing things about any of kind of the gnosis or the spiritual work, the more esoteric, work. It just the idea that we have so much more authority and in our own experience than anyone ever wanted to tell us. You know, it's like
Yes.
authority was always reserved for the dude at the front
Right,
with
of
the
the church.
title. Yeah,
Yeah.
and not
Well,
for
for me, it was the
us.
front of the church,
Yeah,
or the guy leading the Bible study.
yeah, yeah. And we've got so much authority and we can set boundaries and we can ask for what we need and we can go direct, without having the middle person who wants to control the message in some way. But whew, that was a huge awareness for me. And it sounds like it's been pretty powerful for you
Oh
too.
man, it's been so freeing to be able to, well, I think the true revelation was having my eyes opened that it I was taught to look for the word Jesus,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
Like that's the word that you're looking for to know if somebody's saved and in the family. And if they're not in the family, then you need to proselytize because they're going to hell, right? And so like, if you love them enough, you're gonna go preach at them. Thank God I was shy. Thank God. Thank God I could never bring myself to go door to door because like it would just be geez, the thought of doing that like made my bowels turn to water. But like I really truly just believed that. And
Mhm.
then the church closed the door on me. I had begged for help in a marriage that was like slowly, I mean, it was just basically like I I have never been so reduced
Mm,
in my life, um, the way that I was in that marriage. I
wow.
was reduced to a satellite around my husband, and the church encouraged that because, like, the man is the head of the house, right? And I'd been begging for help. I was being psychologically abused, and I was on the phone with my husband one night, and he said something. I had told him, I was like, well, you claim Christ, right? So you're supposed to love this person. And his words were, so I'm supposed to reward him for bad behavior. And it was like, those times where nothing has really happened, but everything just changed.
Mhm.
And those words were like, oh, that's our entire marriage. I've just never performed well enough to earn your love.
Wow.
Got it.
Wow.
And like there was something that, like, that's one of those times when I heard God speak very, very clearly and heard, you just need to get your shit and go.
Yeah.
And I was like, I won't be here when you get home. And that, like, I had no idea that started my way to divorce, started the way to,
Mhm.
the freedom that I have now. thank,
Yeah.
thank God. Um, and the church none of the church leadership believed me that it was God who had told me to leave that relationship and to stay away until it was safe to return there. And nobody believed me because God would never tell you to leave a marriage. And I was like, well, he did. So, I don't know what to tell you. And it got very, very ugly. And it got like increased, like basically what happened was all of the access that I had to God through singing, through worship, through being in church, because I did access the divine in
Mhm.
those ways. They can't keep God out of your worship. Like they just can't. There's no way to do that. So like I had to find new ways in to the divine. And when I had a friend who was a professing witch, and so I never heard the word Jesus, but I saw all of the light that was in her
Mm.
and all of the light that she was giving when she read palms and she did tarot readings. And I listened to how she talked about the healing sessions that she did. And then I remembered when the Pharisees accused Jesus of casting out demons by demons, and he basically tells them, you need to watch out when your eyes so dark that you don't recognize the things of the light. That's on you, man. That's on you.
Mm.
And I was like, I have been taught all wrong. Instead of the word Jesus, I should have been taught to look for light. And so that opened up this way forward for me, to explore all of the things that I really, really was drawn to when I was a little kid, but they were evil, right? So like crystals and like ruins and all of the witchy things, right? Like that I was never allowed to do. And I gotta tell you, like, the thing I love about it most is that I can't do it wrong. There's no way of like, it's a practice, right? You practice the craft. Like, so I'm practicing. There's no way to do it wrong. And every single way is my approach, right? So it works for me. And if it doesn't work, well, then, okay, fine. We'll find another way in. And it's like, God is not going to keep us from finding a way in. And so, like, yeah, I miss singing with a choir. But I definitely don't miss the sermon afterwards.
Trade-offs, right? Trade-offs.
Right.
Yeah.
I kind of want to go to some big gospel churches here in Houston and just stay for the worship service and then leave.
Give me the singing.
Pretty much.
I found recently there's a church in Houston that has it's an Episcopal church, and I didn't know. I just found that this weekend I kind of want to go, but it's an Episcopal church that's open, like really open, but they have a Celtic ceremony on Sunday nights, and so they bring in the Celtic spirituality into the service, and like the prayers are around nature and more of the like Irish Scottish music at the beginning, and maybe we should just go sometime.
Well, no, I would. So there's a Celtic shaman she's Irish,
Really?
that I follow on TikTok. TikTok's an education and revelation, and it will occasionally attack you, and it's good. It's very good. But she talks about like how, according to like Irish, it's the whole religion, the Celtic like practices, there's 3 cauldrons. So like she's like we don't have the 7 chakras, but we do have the 3 cauldrons. And she was doing a lesson about how when we're born our cauldron is turned this way. So like all of them, there's one for your head, there's one for your heart, and then there's one for your, like, basically like where your root would be, your root and your sacral chakras are. And when you're born, they're turned upside down. And the goal of your life is to have every single one of them open to receive. So it's like, and the practice of like, having, and you have to start with the cauldron that's in your head, right? Because it's like from the top down or whatever, receive from the top down. And I was like,
fascinating.
Well, it is. And it's like, basically like my whole entire philosophy now is, Matt, if it works for you and you're thriving, amazing.
And helps you feel connected to something.
Yes. And I mean, my whole thing is like, I have this God besotted little soul. That's why I bought all of that hook, line, and sinker, because I was told this is what will please God. And I was like, okay, it hurts, but I'll do it. All of the things that make me, like, well, it's gonna have to go. Okay. And like I just laced myself into Christianity, and that whole idea, just being free to like reach God in any way that works for you, like go for it. Absolutely go for it. And then tell me about it, because like I want, God is looking for ways to let people in. Like the brand of Christianity I grew up in, like, was all about keeping people out. Like, there's this like, there's a very prideful, we're on the narrow way. We're not on the wide way to destruction.
The super highway here. One thing I remember being a kid, and I don't know how old, but being a kid and thinking, all right, if there's like 7 billion people on the planet, which was maybe about right, then then there's likely 7 billion paths to God, and the point is to find the path that works for you.
Yes.
And why, as a kid, when that was so not part of the culture, I remember thinking that, growing up in rural Oklahoma, there was
Homogenous.
path, there was path. But thinking, yeah, there can be as many paths as there are people, and it's a matter of finding the one that works for you, but then allowing other people to have the path that works for them without judgment.
Yeah.
It's what
Yeah.
works. How about we not judge and let them do you, boo. I mean, just do your thing. And,
Exactly.
and that is it's interesting to me how that is such a challenge. And people, especially people of faith, it's almost as if it's so threatening for someone else to believe a different way, but they don't view it as a threat. It was, ooh, but I want for you, I want your soul to be safe. Like, really? Do you though?
Well, but I did. I mean, honestly, I can say I did. And
Mhm.
I think that I really hmm, my mother brags that she shamelessly brainwashed us, me and my brother.
She brags about this.
She brags about it.
Okay.
She's not lying. Like
Mhm.
the amount of there's a line in my poem that I'm working on for, the performance poetry reading. And it's, I forgot more Bible than you ever learned.
Yeah.
I and then I went on after like high school and chapel and Bible class and everything. I went on to study the Bible for myself because I want to know everything there is to know about God. Like I just do. I'm like, if there's and I've always loved the Bible.
Mm.
There's so much wisdom in the Bible. It's just that the way that it was interpreted for me was ugly. And
Mm.
then after I got divorced and I couldn't go to church, but I still believed in God and I still hadn't let go of any of my beliefs, I had
Yeah,
just
that's
gotten
hard.
really traumatized by the church. And I came across a pastor. His name is Shane Willard, and he has his master's in clinical psychology as well as being like a master's in theology. And like he was mentored by a pastor who's also a rabbi,
Mhm.
who did like his
Cool.
pastoral training and then actually went and became a rabbi. Um, and he's a Hebrew scholar. And so the way that he taught Bible was something completely and totally different. And I've always
Mm.
been like, if I start talking, is past lives, I don't know, ancestors, I have no idea. But if I start thinking about Jerusalem and like the Holy Land, like I start crying. Like I get really emotional. I've never been there, like, but I
Mhm.
get real emotional. And like he the first thing I think I heard him teach was the difference between Hebrew thought and Greek thought. And Greek thought always wants to know the right answer, right? Like if you think about how we do things in the West, like, and we're all Greek thinkers in the West because hello, Western civilization, right? And so there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do things. We're very much a dualistic society. Like there's an in and there's an out, there's a right and a wrong. And so we want to have the correct answer. What's the correct answer? What's the interpretation that's correct, right? Like what's the interpretation of this verse? Whereas Hebrew thought is like that every verse has at least 70 facets. And so I want to know what your thoughts are,
Mm.
and more importantly, I want to know what your questions are about this. Right. And
Beauty.
so the more questions you have, the deeper the conversation can go. And the rabbis teach that like 95% of what we think we know about God is wrong anyway, but he's smiling because we're talking about him. Like God said, cool, my kids are talking about me. Like it's so cute. Look at how wrong they are. Little cute, adorable, like little four-dimensional beings down there in time, like trying to figure out an infinitely dimensional like creator universe, right? And so it becomes well, tell me what your thoughts are on that, you
Mm.
know? And then like, how do we wrestle with the text? Because this was written a really, really long time ago and attitudes were really, really different,
Yeah.
right? So like, why do we take things and make it unchangeable? You know, also, why are we holding the patriarchs up as like examples and role models of how to do things when in fact their families were seriously dysfunctional and maybe they were examples of what not to do? Don't be like Abraham. He landed his wife in a harem twice. Like, why would you hold that up as an example of how to be a good husband? No.
Perspective shift.
Right? Reframing.
Oh, and to go back to the full circle, the ability of words to help us do that. So you had just mentioned performance poetry.
Yes.
Coming up. Tell me like about your current writing and your work with Right Space. What does Right Space do for anyone who might be interested?
Oh man, you got me started. So actually we have an interesting event next Saturday. We are doing our annual cemetery stroll through Glenwood Cemetery.
Oh wow.
Where I hand out writing prompts that will guide you through, I'm hoping, a process. And people may be like, what, a little bit with the writing prompts, but I'm confident that like there's a way in there, you know, like how writing does that, like how you, and then I just want to hear people's like responses to it, because every time there's a writing prompt and the different ways that people take it, that's just golden. So hopefully there'll be some cool writing that comes out of that, because we've got two readings. Actually, we have the performance poetry workshop that's ongoing right now, which I'm actually a part of because I really would like to be on that stage. Not enough Gen X women up on that stage, so it's about time I'm up there. So we have that reading on October 21st at Melange Creperie in the Heights.
Oh, fun.
That's 7 to 8:30. Yeah, we're gonna have it's the first time that I've had a poetry workshop that's entirely men and then me.
Wow.
So that's been cool, and like those guys are just bringing it. And then we have a Halloween open mic on October 29th at Antidote. And yeah, that's gonna be costumed, so I'll get to dress up for like the second time in my life for Halloween, and I'm very excited. I get to host. Like, that's what's crazy. I'm actually hosting that. Little old me. Let's see, what have we got coming up besides, we have a lot of planning sessions and write-ins for October. You know, whether you're like doing NaNoWriMo and need like Preptober planning sessions, or whether you just need like a date to write, because making time and taking the time, because your writing is important, you know. We've got Engaging the Uncanny with my friend Catherine. She's absolutely brilliant, and this is a 2-session workshop that has it's engaging the uncanny, like the spooky in our world, like the world that we live in, and it's basically like looking at horror through the lens of what does it tell us about our fears.
Ooh.
And it's a generative workshop. So that's cool. That's coming up the 16th. That starts the 16th. And then we've got lyric essay with Justin Janice, and if you've never had a class with them, you are missing out. Like, honestly, amazing. Oh, and then these are like my pet ones. Sorry, these are these are my pet, because so many times artists are trying to take the trauma and transform it, right? Like, that's one of the reasons why I loved the Transforming Trauma class that we offer. And this is actually, her name is Debbie Burns, and she is as she puts it herself, she's a badass healer with PTSD.
All right.
And so she is doing a class called Magical AF, which is basically like unlocking those limiting beliefs and setting yourself free to pursue your dreams and be the human being you are, right? Like, it's so true that we hold ourselves back because we're afraid of 100% like genuine authenticity, but that's what the world is desperate for, people who are alive and authentic and genuine. So that one is, those are my And she's also doing in November, it's a 2-part series. It's follow up to Magical AF. And it's called Phoenix Rising. So it's like digging
Nice.
deeper into that. Yeah. And it's that whole, like, we need to get out of our way as artists, right? There's a way that like we can transform that trauma, but like the trauma responses that hold us back, the people pleasing or the perfectionism. Oh my God, the perfectionism, like all of those things. So
Perfectionism, people pleasing, and then something you mentioned at the top of our conversation, which is this idea that if I'm true to it, people are going to think I'm crazy.
yeah.
If it's not part of the mainstream, then she must be nuts. But we do that to ourselves first. I don't know how many conversations I've started with, this may sound crazy, but So the fact that there are more and more people out there encouraging that kind of authenticity through creativity, to allow that to shine almost like a beacon for others to go, oh, okay.
Well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's so the friend that I told you about, the one who like was the first practicing witch that I was truly friends with. She said something she was doing a palm reading, and I had the privilege of watching her, and I'm not kidding. She like basically stood that soul up and sent him on his way. Like, she reminded him who he was, and he stood up, and in that, like, it was powerful. Anyway, she looked at him, and because he is an educator, and she said, you need to stop worrying about like being in the spotlight. She's like, you're not in the spotlight, you are the spotlight. And I was like, that's what we do as writers, right? We shine a spotlight on ourselves so that you can see, like, you're not alone. Like, that's what you discover as an artist and in an artistic community, like Right Space, like you find like, oh, I'm not the only one who thinks that way or feels that way. I'm not the only crazy person in the room, I'm not alone in this. It's a truly human, like, it's just a human experience. And it's powerful when you think that you had something to carry all by yourself, and you like write about it, and you present it, and all of a sudden there's all of these hands that help you hold it up, and it's not nearly so heavy as you thought it was. And then there's this, I always say that writers do the work that God does when he reminded the prophets that they were not alone. Because the comfort that God gave the prophets when they were feeling completely alone in the wilderness, persecuted, right, there was always a reminder somewhere along the line, you're not alone. There's the remnant that I reserved. There's 7,000 who have not bent the knee, whatever it was. And that's what writers do. We're doing the work of God and reminding people who have been convinced that they're alone in this world, and convinced that they have to do this by themselves, and convinced that they are just the only person who's this much of a freak or this much of a whatever it is. How many times you got shamed, or took up the shame, picked it up. So yeah, like, by being vulnerable, we can actually do the work of God by saying, you're not alone. You're not even a freak. It's a complete and total normal psychological response to some really bad situations. Like, give yourself grace. I mean,
yeah.
And
the whole idea that we're all here to walk each other home. And sometimes it's the walking each other home back to ourselves. Oh, I know the way. I've been there. Let's just hold hands and go together.
I know. Well, it's we're not supposed to do it by ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever community, like whether it's a coven or church. And I know that my person always tells me that they're not all churches. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm making a point. It's poetic license. It's hyperbole. It's grandiosity to make the point I'm making. But like, it's just finding people who will hold you up when, or sit down and take a rest with you, but not let you stay there too long, right?
Yeah. You did something for me in the class that we were in together. And I never mentioned it to you, I don't think, but we were talking about like our backgrounds. And here I had told myself this story that growing up in rural Oklahoma and the very narrow, religious belief systems that at least I grew up as a part of, or that I grew up with those around me. I really thought it was a place thing. And so I held some maybe animosity toward my home state because of that. And you had mentioned you were sharing some experiences about Florida and California. And I'm like, wait a minute, those are supposed to be the liberal places where people don't think like this. But you had those experiences there. And for some reason, it's just like all that kind of angst that I held about a state just kind of disappeared. I went, oh, it was
Oh,
never,
I'm so glad.
it was never really about the state. It was maybe state of mind in some places, but and that's not to say that Oklahoma is the most, progressive place in the world either, but other places, it was just wild how in seeing some commonality in someone else who experienced it somewhere else felt wildly freeing. And I don't know why. I can't even explain why. Why is
Isn't
that?
that
I
weird
don't
though?
know.
And it's the craziest things, and you're like, oh well, that unlocked that. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Don't know what it was or how it was, or it was the exact right way that you needed to hear it, or yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, I think I choose to look at things as blessings now, because I
Mhm.
really, really do like where I'm at. I really like what
Mm.
I know. I like that I have finally reached a point where I am okay with being a disciple of the rabbi from Galilee, like
Mm.
the unchristian disciple of the rabbi from Galilee, right? And also being a practicing witch. Um,
Mhm.
and like just being from so many different places
Mm.
and having the churches be the same. No matter where we went, we could find that particular set of beliefs, and they were the strip mall churches. And like, the word non-denominational makes me go like, get back. I don't really like, or like, if the word fellowship is in your church, I'm sorry. But it is honestly, now it's like an entire huge demographic of people who just got indoctrinated,
Mm.
and there were all kinds of scare tactics that were going on. Like, there was the satanic panic in the 80s. Like, I don't know if you had that in Oklahoma,
Yeah.
but we had it in Iowa and Phoenix, like the Midwest, and Phoenix,
Yeah.
Arizona, big city. And all of these just different things that were constantly, and it was the end times, that it had to be the end times, and the rapture is just going to be around the corner. And like, interpreting Revelations as a book of prophecy. And I'm like, okay, so learning now that it's a genre, like it's an actual genre called apocalyptic literature. The book of Daniel is also in this like genre of literature, and it was a way for oppressed Hebrew people to write and encourage one another. And John, being of Hebrew background, being a disciple of a rabbi, Hebrew rabbi, like, he knew how to like encourage people who were being sent to the lions. And
Mm.
like, but like where you were talking about how it's that one way, and it comes up against a wall, right? Because it's one way. And I was having a conversation with a family member, and I'm learning stuff, and I'm that particular kind of geek who like starts like 96% of her sentences with "did you know?" Like, and so I'm like, like, learning that Revelations is actually a historical book in a genre of literature, and that the beast was referring to Nero, who was given the nickname the Beast because he did things like burn humans as torches for garden parties.
Oh Lord.
I know, you're like, okay, crossing a line. Yes, beast, that is beast. But I mean, you know, and I was like, the mark of the beast was actually something that the early Christians were dealing with as right then and there, because if you didn't burn incense to the Caesars, which would have been it would have been looked at on as idolatry, because by then it was the cult of the Caesars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got like a mark by the priest on your forehead so that you could go into the market and you could buy and sell, because you had the mark on your forehead that said, cool, you burnt incense. And so it's called the mark of the beast among themselves, so that they knew that what they were talking about without getting dragged into, you know, the local arena or whatever it was. It was a way to talk amongst themselves it was code, right? So all of these symbols, all of these like metaphors are really, honestly and truly, like they have historical like meaning. But I remember Bible studies where they were talking about like, well, if you were going to describe an Apache helicopter, attack helicopter, like and you were a first century, you know, Jewish person, like you can see like that's what he was trying to describe. And I remember those Bible studies and I'm like, oh, so the world is all going to end and hopefully we get raptured before this really terrible reckoning that, you know, God's going to pour out on the earth.
And we wonder where anxiety in kids starts.
Well, and it honestly, like now that I think about it, and now that I've like unpacked a lot of boxes, and what I really have actually prayed for is the ability to see what is underneath all of those things, right? Because there's always an underlying belief, right? Like people who believe that the vaccine is the, you know, the mark of the beast, there's an underlying belief that God would be in heaven gathering the angels around going, watch this, a bunch of my kids are about to get tricked into eternal damnation. Solid. Like, sorry, but your God's an asshole.
Yeah,
that's a dick move, dude. Like that's, I mean, just like as far as like God's go, that's not one I'm worshiping. That's one I'm like, that's like, ugh. So like there's that underlying belief. And if you have the underlying belief that the world is all supposed to end and that we're actually getting worse, like it's getting worse, right? And that it's going to end in blood and fire, then you are completely released from participating in the repair of the world. And like that is something that we are called and required to do. Like that existed in Judaism, you know. And I read this amazing book one time by a rabbi by the name of Weiland, and it's Jesus in the Time of the Jews. And he's basically saying, look, like Christianity and modern day rabbinic Judaism all come from Second Temple Judaism. That's where Jesus was walking around in. And there's Christianity. And then you have the destruction of the temple right after that. And then you have modern Judaism, like, or, you know, modern rabbinic Judaism, like arising out of that. And like, we have completely ignored all of like the teaching, like, you know, everything that has gone into what we actually believe or whatever. And the idea of it's I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, but it's tikkun olam, right? It's the repair of the world. And that is what you are called to as like a believer in God, as a follower of, you know, Torah. It is that you're here to participate in the repair of the world. And so like these Christians who are sitting around saying that the world is getting worse, and it's getting worse until it reaches a certain like tipping point where God's like, well, that's it, that's the end of the world, like open up the vials, open up the bowls, like
experiment's over.
Like, yeah, like, well, the sin of the world has reached its, you know, critical mass or whatever. And so, yeah, you're completely released from any sort of responsibility other than sitting back and watching the world burn. Like, so
it's their fault. Yeah.
And look at, we're being good over here doing nothing. We don't drink and we don't smoke and we don't do drugs and we don't have sex outside of marriage and we don't do anything else either.
This kind of comes back full circle to where we started in terms of,
kind of does.
You know, you had talked about words and books and writing. participating in the repair of the world. And that's why it felt like a passion project,
It
or passion
is.
calling for you. And now I see, through your own kind of spiritual views in terms of the repair of the world being something we're all called to do and to be a part of, and finding your unique voice in that, especially in a path that you found personal healing that can
Mhm.
also be healing for others. What an amazing way to wrap it up and put a bow on a like a soul's calling, or spiritual purpose or life purpose, in terms of repairing the world.
Yeah, I mean, what greater thing can you possibly do, right? You know? And
Yeah.
one of the things that the pandemic really got me thinking about, because I found myself like with my first Muslim friend, like really true, like I had been acquaintances with Muslim people, but like this woman lived with me for a period of time, and like she is my little sister. I adore her, and you know, she'll tell me, she's like, "You're triggering on your Christianity right now, so you can just keep that right out of my faith." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll do that. Thank you." But like we had a disagreement over the word prophet, because prophet in the evangelical, like the charismatic
Mhm.
church, is means a very different thing. So like there's so many people who have a prophetic gifting, right? Like, and for Muslim people, like, no, there are five prophets, peace be upon them, and so like prophecy is, so we had to like get to a point where I was like, oh, so here's the problem. We're getting stuck on the word instead of digging at what we are trying to accomplish with language. So
Mhm.
once we realize like your definition of prophet and my definition of prophet are completely different things, and I can apply a different word that isn't prophet to like the concept, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so when you get underneath again, it goes back to like, quit looking at the words themselves. What are we trying to accomplish? We're all talking about the same thing. I mean, like, my friend sent me this Taoist meditation, right? And he was talking about the smiling energy, and I was like, if that's not the Holy Spirit, I don't know what is, you know? And like, it's funny because I do have so much Bible, like now that I'm actually listening to other people, and like they'll say it one way and I'm like, oh, so like the way the Bible says it is this way.
Yeah.
And it's simply a different way of stating it, and there's wisdom, right? There's wisdom and there's beauty, if we would stop making one right answer. Like, it's a complicated book. Like, it's full of like all different kinds of writings. Like, there are contradictions within the same chapter sometimes, it feels like in
Mhm.
Proverbs, I think they're like only like a chapter apart. It's like, do not answer a fool, or you will be made foolish with him, something along those lines. And then like a chapter later, it's like, answer a fool according to your wisdom. Like, so it's like, so which one am I supposed to do? Like, don't answer, or like make a wise answer? Like,
Don't make a foolish answer unless
does it
I'm also
depend
a
on the
fool. I don't
situation?
know.
Like, yeah, I mean, there's so much wisdom, and then of course, like the literal, when you make it a literal
Mhm.
interpretation. Holy,
Yeah.
I think I spent my
It's a little
entire
scary.
like Christian years trying to reconcile a God that told the Israelites to go into Canaan and kill everybody down to the child born yesterday,
Mm.
with the Savior who watched, like, friends lower their, friend down through the roof and was like, "Oh, you got cool friends. I'm gonna forgive your sins." I got like
Yeah.
those two things like do not compute. And like, no matter the rationalizations, no matter what, like there was just always something in me that was like, because my personal experience with God had always been so gentle and so kind.
Mm.
And every time I'd come to God with something that hurt me or something that I was ashamed of, I'd always been met with gentleness and like so
Mm.
much grace, right? But you bring it to a church and they're going to use it against you. Like the people in like my church, when I would bring them like the things that were hurting me and got used against me in my divorce.
Yeah.
Like,
Mm.
I was like, there's got to be what you're practicing. It you're saying things like God is love. But here's what happens, like what I've learned from like growing up with abusers, and the church operates in a lot of ways like as an abuser, because abusers teach you to pay attention to what they're saying instead of what they're doing. You know, they're telling you, but I love you so much. Meanwhile, they're over here doing things that are hurting you. No, but I love you. I love you. Yeah, but you know, so it's like the idea that love and hurt go together. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like to
thankfully
feel
God is
found.
better than that.
Thankfully. And thankfully, when we care enough about that connection, we can find our path,
Yes.
the path that's healing and feels that gentleness and feels like love, to make that connection in whatever way it looks like.
Exactly. I mean, and it's just one of those, like, one of the things that I've loved is finding the solo practice. And
Mhm.
then now it's kind of like, it's interesting that I have other friends who are very interested in like paying attention to the full moon ritual, like, you know, paying
Mhm.
attention to moon cycles, and like, and I mean, how just really cool is that? Because according to the moon cycles, you're basically just staying mindful
Right.
of what your intentions are.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound
Ooh.
truly evil. I'm not sure. Also, like, Judaism's on a lunar calendar anyway, so just saying. I mean, like,
What amazes me is looking back at, all the pagan symbols, rituals, everything else that were just co-opted. We're just going to
co-opted.
co-opt them and call them our own and call you bad if you somehow recognize or honor the way they used to be before we took them over.
I
Oh, okay.
know.
Oh, okay. Got it. I see you. You know? Yeah. Yeah.
It just like never ceases to amaze me. And yeah, I was like, wow. And then I think so like the process of like decolonizing as well, because
Yeah.
like, you know, I grew up, so my dad took us to be missionaries on the Navajo reservation
Oh, wow.
when
Yeah.
I was like, I guess I was maybe like 18 months old. Um so yeah, colonizer, like, just wow. But like I remember reading that white sage kills like 98% of airborne bacteria,
Mm-hmm.
which means that like sweat lodge ceremonies for people who are sick, and like that is completely and totally healing. And I remember like thinking like, oh, so a bunch of white missionaries just showed up, didn't understand what was going on, and labeled it wrong because it didn't look like what they were familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what else did they do that with? And
Mm.
what's the lens that I was taught to look at things through? And why is it that like I was taught that lens? And just when, like, we're all born with a set of like blinders,
Mm-hmm.
or they get affixed as we grow, right? Like I was born with particular set of, you know, like white educated family, upper middle class. Now that when my mom became a doctor, we suddenly became like, you know, upper middle class. I'm pretty, so like that is it. That was the first one that I realized, like, oh, other people don't like, that was the first set of goggles that got ripped off for me. Like, and you know, the countless others, just evangelical, that's a huge set of blinders. And when you do start having them come off, right, it's like, wow, what else did I miss? What haven't you been telling me? Like, I am just fascinated with everything that I didn't know or didn't see or was taught was wrong or bad, or like, yeah, like, holy cow. I was living in a little box that you guys made for me.
Well, it seems like you've blown up the box and you've
I did.
but you didn't throw everything out with it. Like, rather, you can still have an appreciation for, the rabbi from Galilee,
Oh, how can,
and
yeah. How
and
can you not
not
though?
throw it all out. And
Yeah.
there are some that do, that even the name, because it's so fraught in some minds with all the all the baggage that can go along with his fan club, that it's like, we'll just toss him too. And so I really appreciate your perspectives that here all this stuff has happened, but you've gone deep enough in your own study and your own healing and your own, but how do I view the world, that you can keep the gift without tossing it too.
Well,
That's huge.
I think I always say that I have had an incredibly like blessed life in that I've had huge deposits made in my
Mm.
life by various people, and like a lot of them were cracks
Hmm.
that like God was like, I'm gonna, this is something that's gonna create enough of a crack that light's gonna get through,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the fact that that when we were on the Navajo reservation, like I was this little toddler, and like there were women who would take me from my mom and like pass me around, and like I would come back covered in turquoise jewelry. And so, oh, and then even when I was even littler, like my mom's best friend was Vietnamese, and she was the only one who could get me to eat. Whatever's on the end of her chopsticks, I would eat it, but like whatever was on the end of my mom's spoon, I was like, nope. So like she would just my mom would panic. She was a new mom. She thought I was gonna die and like my brain wasn't gonna develop because I wasn't getting enough protein. So she'd like take me bawling over to Chum, and Chum would just like calmly sit me down on the table in front of her and be like, "Here, Shimmy," and like what it was on the chopsticks. I'm like, okay, I'll eat that. So like all of these faces cooing over me when I was a
Mm.
baby and like just loving me as a baby didn't look like me.
Mm.
They were
Mhm.
people of color. And then I went to high school in Miami, and I was I'm not quite sure how many white people there. That's my mind your time, Jamie. You have another meeting at 3:30. Um, but like I think there were 5 or 6 white kids in my class.
Mhm.
Um, and it was so amazing because I was like, oh, Cuban culture, like how could you not love Cuban culture with grandmas who feed you black beans and rice at 8:30 at night and teach you how to make Cuban coffee and like pinch you and tell you how cute you are and like, ay Polito, I like this one. Like how can you not love that? Like, and then the church that I went to, the first church that I really chose for myself as
Mhm.
an adult was this huge multiracial church, and I sang in the choir there.
No.
And it was like that choir sang for the city of Tempe's Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, and like that choir looks like I Have a Dream, right?
I love
It
that.
looks like
Wow.
that speech. And then when I moved to the deep south, which was a huge revelation, like North Florida was like, well, this is not the Florida I was familiar with in Miami. It looks very different here. And my mom and I were the first white members in the entire history of like the Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church. And I mean, the pastor, God bless him, because what the heck are these white people doing in my church? Sat my mom down and he's like, why are you here?
Mhm.
And my mom was like, well, the church that I was going to, like my husband and I are getting divorced and they're not happy about the divorce. And he's like, oh, you're here because you need us.
Mm.
And I was like,
Mm.
oh, and then I started singing in the
Whew.
choir, and it was
Gosh.
so I've had all of these experiences outside of like the bad stuff.
Mhm.
And at the same time, like I was a solitary, weird little kid. Like I look at myself sometimes and go, okay, I don't think I'm on the spectrum, but man, I was weird. And so like I was very much alone, and my like imaginary friend was like the rabbi from Galilee, and he
Mhm.
sat and drank tea with me that I made in my play kitchen, and we read books together and we talked about things. And that's as you know and the moments that
Freedom.
I touched God in church, and the moments that God touched me, and the moments that I've heard God's voice, like the church hurt me terribly because I was taught that that was my family, you
Mm.
know, And what I realized was I only belonged so long as I went along.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's a lot of alongs in there, but yeah, and that was never the case with God though. Like
Mm. Mm-mm-mm.
like there was no, and what's crazy is like the more I've gotten like where I embrace my witchiness and I embrace like the fact that I apparently I'm having a goth phase. I don't know. Like um I just like the closer I feel to the divine,
Mm.
because it's coming back to the idea that God had when they made me, you know, and that it was a good idea. They had a
Mm.
good idea.
Yeah. And God gets to love you for you. And the more you're you, the more you can access that love. And what a beautiful thing.
Well, and I mean, okay, so like, I don't know if like you say you didn't grow up in church, but like the evangelical church that I grew up in, there was so much focus on being a spirit
Mm.
led Christian. So they're like Paul talks about carnal Christians who are like all talk and no soul in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the spirit led Christians that like are led by the Spirit of God. And they're the ones who, well, they're doing their Christianity right, because it's all about whether you're doing it right. And I had this realization, and it was even before I think I left the church. I think I tried to talk about it and they were like, no, that's not what Paul meant. But I was like, honestly, being spirit led and being that kind of Christian is simply being and doing whatever is most authentic to myself at that moment in time.
Mm.
Because the most authentic Jamie is truly kind and truly does want the best for people, truly wants to have things, and so if I give myself a minute and get past like the surface, like angry, like triggering, whatever it is that I'm doing, and like, like the truly authentic Jamie thing to do. And they were like, nope, that's not what that means. And I'm like, okay, but I think it is.
I want it to be what it means. So
I'm pretty sure that, yeah, like
if that helps me feel closer to God, then I'm gonna take it.
why does it have
Yeah.
to be wrong though? Is it because
Yeah.
I'm a girl and I said it?
I so appreciate you spending time with me today.
Oh my gosh, I've had the best time.
And the
I could
depth
talk
of
to you for like 3 more hours. So eventually we have to meet up in person. And
I think that is a very good idea. I need to show up at a Right Space event sometime.
I
How
would
do
love
people
it.
find you or find Right Space? Like if they want to go to
So
the
it's
website?
rightspacehouston.org. And we've got all of our events there. I will say that our website is a little bit clunky, but it's what we got right now. So just the best way, honestly, to know exactly what we've got going on is to sign up for our newsletter.
Okay. Yep.
And they can do that on the website. If they, at the bottom of absolutely every single page, it's like, become a member, also sign up for our newsletter. So sign up for the newsletter. That goes out every other week. I try to get it out by Friday. I was trying to get it out by Tuesday. Now we're getting it out by Fridays. So
I hear you.
it goes.
rightspacehouston.org.
Yeah.
Also the newsletter. The newsletter is great, by the way. It's so filled with
Thank you.
information and inspiration. Yeah, I
Thank
enjoy
you.
reading it. So thank you for sending it out.
I
Yeah.
put some thought and time into those. So like I
Yeah,
appreciate
that's good.
hearing that it's not just because you like send it out and it's like into the void.
No, it's great. And not only are there so many events and ways that you can get involved if you're a writer or a creative or just like to hang out with other word nerds, in the Houston area.
Yes.
But there's also so many, or at least there was during pandemic times and up until now, online courses that you don't have to be in Houston to
You
participate
don't.
in.
Yeah, like the spooky generative one, the magical AF, the Phoenix Rising, those 3 are all online. And so you can, be from anywhere. And yeah, the goal is to have fully hybrid workshops.
Mm.
And a new space. We've got an Indiegogo campaign coming up.
Yeah.
So we lost our studio during the pandemic because we just it was a huge expense. And so, not being able to meet there and use it.
Yeah.
So we are really working to, we need money to get a new space so that we can have, like the in-person events that have right now we are using the most amazing, cute little bungalow in Montrose for our in-person events, but the internet is spotty and it's, small, and we are rapidly outgrowing it, and we definitely need better internet. So like, yeah, we have some amazing perks in the Indiegogo campaign that I've been putting together. There's a ton of consultations from our instructors for like manuscript consults and like Q&As about like publishing and all kinds of cool stuff, as well as like book perks. And I'm going to be making some book paper or book page roses. And yeah, we got some really cool stuff coming up. So yeah.
Excellent.
Check it out, Right Space. I think we're awesome. We're definitely the community that I want us, and I think the energy that I try to put in it is that I want us to be the community who gives you permission to be wildly successful and also to fail.
Yeah.
And then get back up and be like, it's cool. Like we all do that.
And I learned something along the way.
Exactly. So
part of the path to being wildly successful.
Yeah,
I question those who
cheerleaders.
Yeah. There we go. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I really look forward to future conversations about these and other topics. And to all of you who have listened and watched, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of Dirt Road Divinity. If you liked what you saw, please go ahead and like the video or leave a comment letting me know. Also, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel and be kept up to date when new episodes drop in the future. If you'd like to connect in between episodes, you can come follow the Facebook or Instagram pages just at Dirt Road Divinity. You can even email me with any show or guest ideas that you might have. And my email address is lisa@dirtroaddivinity.com. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to you tuning in next time.